Namaste. Friends and followers of the Pyramid Yoga Center, this is a little explanation of why it's called the Pyramid Yoga Center. I'm going to go into the roots of yoga as we have been discovering in Egypt, and there will be a series of documentaries, little videos on this. So watch carefully. We're going to show you some slides and I'm going to explain a few things. This is just the first one, a little introduction. Watch carefully. So we have Egyptian roots of yoga. How does it look? You can see the pyramids in the background. There's a lot, and the pyramid itself is one of the symbols used in the first chakra as a symbol of Kundalini. So we're going to go into more details on this. The ancientness of Egyptian culture goes back quite a long ways, and it's the roots of a lot of Western traditions, from the religions to Freemasonry. The original information came from Egypt. Here we have the Sphinx, which is sitting guarding the entrance to the whole pyramid complex. And if you go to the Egypt and you look at this, you can see that there are erosion lines going down the sides of the Sphinx, and it's water erosion lines. So it's been established through geological research that the Sphinx has been sitting there patiently for at least 12,000 years. Otherwise, there's no accounting for these water erosion lines. It takes many years to make that much, create that much erosion, and it hasn't really rained in Egypt for the last 8,000 years. So this is pretty conclusive of the fact that it's been there a long time, way beyond what archaeologists and Egyptologists, most Egyptologists, will tell us. So here's another anomaly, something that can't be explained, and I saw this when I was there in 1986. These tunnels and caverns underneath. At the time, this was not excavated, and if you're walking around the base of the pyramid, you'd see these tunnels going down as if they were cut straight down in squares, like an elevator shaft going down into who knows where. I explored a few of them. There were tunnels and rooms and caverns underneath, and now they're excavating all over. This is quite a ways down. You're looking at 50 meters below the pyramid. Anomalies, things that cannot be explained. So we are going to go through some of these videos and explain a few more things. But for now, the roots of Egyptian yoga. Let's go back to the time of Moses. This is one story everyone knows about. He was born and raised in Egypt, adopted by one of the princesses of the time who became the queen. So his education was in the royal schools of that culture, and it would have been of the highest order. He was considered to be the son of a pharaoh. And that education includes everything that the Egyptian religion and philosophers and rulers of the land knew about. So the rebellion, he brought the Israelites out of Egypt. They wandered around the desert for decades. And he's the one who wrote the first book of the Bible, Genesis, and the following 3 or 4 books. And this holy book, since it originated with him, originated in Egyptian thought. And we'll go through what that is as we go through these videos. Then we come to the 10 Commandments written by Moses, foundation of the Egyptian Book of Life, written on papyrus leaves and carved in temple walls hundreds and thousands of years before Moses. They were grammatically changed. The question in the Egyptian books was for the dying soul: have you ever killed someone? And he changed it to thou shalt not kill, made a command out of a question. did that with the rest of them. Have you ever committed adultery? Became, thou shalt not commit adultery. Have you ever stolen? Thou shalt not steal. So it was not originated by Moses. He had learned them in his earlier education. So the biblical beginnings of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all evolved from these original commandments and the first books of the Bible. They were referred to as the Torah. Moses was proclaimed to be the author in Babylonian texts centuries later, 2nd and 5th centuries AD. And almost a millennium later, a Jewish rabbi proclaimed Moses to be divinely inspired in the 12th century. It became law that people must believe God gave these books to Moses. So going back to the Egyptian divine connection, which they established in their religious ceremonies, the way they established that was through the use of these flowers, the blue lotus, which is found in temple walls everywhere throughout Egypt. The offering of the blue lotus to the princes, to the priests, and cannot deny that it's an important part of their culture. And in the descriptions of how they used it, it was steeped in a jug of wine, generally for 7 days, and then given as a drink. So going back, what has been discovered lately, since it's in all the temple art, people have been looking into this, and the blue lotus has been found is highly psychedelic. So that makes it an interesting coincidence that the Egyptian tradition and the original culture was using psychedelics to get in touch with the divine principle. And then this is the source of all the religions that stem out of Egypt. And it coincides with the Mayan mushroom tradition, Toltec and Aztec peyote rituals, Inca and Amazonian ayahuasca ceremonies, the Indian Soma, to mention a few of these cultures. So here's a depiction of a scene in the palace, the blue lotus, a jug of wine, and women gathering the lotus and preparing for what comes next. Then we come to the travels of Jesus, centuries later, told in our biblical stories that they were told, the Holy Family, by an angel that they must flee to Egypt, which they did very quickly to save his life. And then he only returned many years later. The next story of Jesus is when he's 12 years old. So he spent 10 years in Egypt. His education was then also Egyptian, his primary education. And when he comes back, he's astounding the rabbis and the people at the temple with all of his wisdom that is written in the Bible. So this whole story of Egypt, its influence on Western civilization and cultures, is something we should be looking at much more deeply. After his appearance in the temple, he has not seen her again for another 18 years. During that time, he went to India and Tibet, where they still have his story, documents and records. There's books written on that, and even a BBC documentary at this point. One of the books by a German author is Jesus Lived in India. Another is The Lost Years of Jesus by Helen Kubler-Ross. And both of these books are based on the same texts from India, which surfaced in the West in the late 1890s, were presented to the Vatican, and the people bringing the presentation were told to destroy them. Christianity. What does it have to do with yoga? Well, this picture tells it. The drawing is from a sketch I took from a wall carving in the Luxor Museum during my first visit in 1986. I have been told that it's been removed, but I'm going back to check that out shortly. So this is 3,500 years old, and you can clearly see Chakra Asana, Trikonasana, Konasana, Queen Nefertiti, and musicians in the background. So the idea of what was the plaque and the description in the museum was actually saying, this is Queen Nefertiti and her dancers. if you know these steps of the dance, you recognize what they were doing. This was one of my first insights into how much they were involved in yoga. Then we have the story of Kundalini, which you find everywhere. Most people know, they have seen the picture of King Tut with the serpent coming out of his forehead, over his head, out of the forehead, the command center. This is a symbol of Kundalini. And some of King Tut's treasures that are still in the museum in Luxor are little golden serpents. So the serpents here along the walls of one of the temples, this is just outside of Cairo. Kundalini, serpents all over the place. The cobra is a common symbol to many cultures, obviously in India and all over the place in Angkor Wat and here in Egypt. An important discovery. The Egyptian Book of Life, written by Dr. Ramses Salim, is an insightful book into what they were actually doing in their religious ceremonies, why they did things, and the fact that they had techniques and methods for going into higher states of consciousness, from breathing techniques to detoxification techniques, and we get into other aspects. The Papyrus of Gurusher is translated as the Book of Breathings, and it brings into play a lot of other information, like they were doing stretching exercises, postures, power exercises, glandular exercises, all with Egyptian names and words, which are not the same as Sanskrit. But we're talking about the same thing, just described in a different language. So, with all the breathing exercises that are in there, it's no wonder that Moses wrote in the first page of the Bible, God breathed life into the nostrils of man and he becomes a living soul. So, then we come a little further into this book of breathings, and we find interesting descriptions of an electromagnetic energy body with its 7 cycles. Now, a cycle is something that goes in circles, a wheel is defined by a circle, and a wheel is a chakra. So we're talking about the same thing. Instead of stumbling on the descriptions and the words of the description, we should look behind and see what it's really all about. So in the next video, I'm going to be making the comparisons between these descriptions of the cycles, or the chakras, in the electromagnetic energy body, and the chakras as they are explained in the Pranamaya Kosha of Indian Yoga. That's all for now. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for the next one.